Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Hi. Wow, everybody's alive. Thank you all for who came out in person and those that are online watching. I am thrilled to know that so many of y'all want to be informed voters and know what's on your ballot on August 25th. My name is Anahita Irvin. I am the Fiscal Policy Analyst at the Oklahoma Policy Institute. And before I get started, I want to thank Mayflower UCC for hosting this town hall today. I also want to thank our partners who helped us put this town hall idea together. And lastly, for folks that need to use the bathroom facilities, they are the way you entered to your right, to my right, whatever. I will serve today as both the MC and one of the presenters. We are honored to be co-hosting this event with the ACLU of Oklahoma. Each of our organizations will present one state question for 10 minutes each, and we will have 15 minutes at the end for audience questions. Oklahoma Policy Institute is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that works statewide to advance equitable and fiscally responsible policies that expand opportunities for all Oklahomans. And we do this through nonpartisan research, analysis, and advocacy in policy areas ranging from housing to criminal justice to tax policy. And while some of this work does occur inside the Capitol building, engaging with lawmakers, a lot of our work does occur outside of the Capitol building. Our amazing organizing team, two of the staff who are here, Josh and Molly, they live throughout the state and focus on strengthening community connections and provide resources to assist everyday Oklahomans to advocate for themselves and their communities to ensure that all Oklahomans have a healthy and safe life. ACLU of Oklahoma is also a nonprofit. They are nonpartisan and they are based in Oklahoma City. And they're devoted to the defense and promotion of the individual rights that are guaranteed to us in our Oklahoma Constitution and the US Constitution. They are a fabulous partner in this work, and I am so happy to have the Executive Director, Tamaya Cox-Ture, here with us today to present on one of the state questions. Being able to advocate for yourself requires civic engagement and it requires civic education. And today's town hall event has been put on for that very reason, civic education. If you haven't heard, there's an election on August 25th, and there are two state questions on your ballot, State Question 844 and State Question 846. And regardless of your party affiliation, whether you're Republican, Democrat, or Independent, you get to vote in this election, and you have a say on these issues. For viewers watching online, please drop your questions or comments in the YouTube chat, and if we're not able to get to your questions during the event, we will definitely leave responses in the YouTube comments afterwards. You can also email your questions to us at info@okpolicy.org or acluok@acluok.org. I want to start by saying that not all state questions are created equal. Usually when we hear state questions, we think about people putting state questions on the ballot by gathering signatures. Those are called initiative petitions. State Question 846 and 844 are not initiative petitions, they are legislative referendums, which means they came from the legislature. They are on the ballot in August because lawmakers passed legislation during this past session requiring it to be on the August ballot specifically. So let's look at what lawmakers are asking people to vote on. State Question 844 is about how, if at all, local entities will be reimbursed by the state for lost revenue. Specifically, it has to do with changing the reimbursement methodology of a fund called the Ad Valorem Reimbursement Fund. Now, to simplify things, ad valorem means property taxes, and I know you all know what property taxes are. So if I say ad valorem, I need you guys to think property taxes. So to understand State Question 844, I think it's helpful to understand the historical context that created the Ad Valorem Reimbursement Fund to begin with. Knowing the history helps explain what's being changed via State Question 844. So how did the Ad Valorem Reimbursement Fund come to be? Back in the 1980s, the economic conditions in the US were not great. There was stagflation, which is high unemployment, high inflation. There was the Iranian Revolution of 1979 that shocked the oil markets and skyrocketed oil and gas prices. And there were bank failures throughout the United States. And those economic conditions were very present in Oklahoma. Oklahoma lawmakers at the time wanted to alleviate these economic circumstances. And the way they did this was by trying to attract companies to the state of Oklahoma. So in 1985, lawmakers introduced a state question, State Question 588. To create an incentive program for companies. The way this incentive would work is if companies came and set up shop in Oklahoma and they met certain capital investment requirements and employment requirements, then that company wouldn't have to pay property taxes for 5 years. Sounds like a great deal for the company. The thinking was, if companies set up shop in Oklahoma, jobs will be created, investments will be made, and the economy will improve. This incentive is called the 5-year manufacturing ad valorem exemption. However, lawmakers knew that property taxes are a crucial revenue source for local entities. Think public schools, county governments, sheriff departments, emergency management services like your ambulances, and career techs. In fact, property tax revenue is the only revenue stream that stays at the local level. It never goes to the state legislature. So this incentive that was created, the manufacturing exemption, would mean that local services would no longer get the property tax revenue from those companies that were eligible for the incentive. Lawmakers at the time didn't want local services to go without that property tax revenue because the state wanted to give an incentive to companies. And so the state, and truly everyday Oklahoma taxpayers, took on the responsibility to refund localities for that lost revenue. And this is done via the ad valorem reimbursement fund. It's reimbursing localities. This was also created in 1985 via the state question 588. So the state gives companies an incentive in the form of a 5-year exemption on their property taxes and then turns around and reimburses localities with the money from the ad valorem reimbursement fund. The reason I say taxpayers took on the responsibility of reimbursing localities is because the reimbursement fund itself is funded by 1% of all income tax revenue that the state collects. So really, Oklahoma taxpayers have been subsidizing companies in Oklahoma for 4 decades. Since 1987 to 2025, adjusted for inflation, the fund has paid out about $2.8 billion. And this incentive is available to any company that qualifies, meaning that local governments and communities do not get to decide if they want that company to reside in their county or not, and receive that 5-year exemption or not. Counties and communities accept the companies because even a little economic development is deemed as good. And with State Question 588 in 1985, the legislature and the state promised to reimburse those localities fully. State Question 844 is trying to go back on that promise. So what does State Question 844 ask voters to do? Let me start with what it doesn't do. State Question 844, regardless of whether it passes or fails in August, does not touch the 5-year property tax exemption that is provided to companies. So even if State Question 844 passes, fails, whatever happens, companies that are eligible will still get the 5-year exemption. What the legislature is asking from voters is to grant blanket authority to the legislature to change the methodology that is used to reimburse localities. Think schools and counties. Lawmakers do not specify in the state question language how they want to change the reimbursement methodology. They just want voters to trust that they will change it in the right way. People are concerned State Question 844 will give the legislature the power to pick and choose which counties to reimburse, if they reimburse at all. And most importantly, State Question 844 does not address the root of the problem, and we will see some solutions later on in this presentation. I think it's important to understand where State Question 844 came from explicitly. So the ad valorem reimbursement fund has not been sufficient to make full reimbursements to local governments since 2002, meaning that 1% of income tax revenue has not been enough since 2002. The legislature has had to appropriate additional money from the general revenue fund, which is the state's budget, to ensure that the legislature meets its reimbursement obligations to local entities. Supporters of State Question 844 say that the cost of the program and the state's share of the responsibility is growing, and given the pressures that are already on the state budget, having to appropriate additional money for this reimbursement fund puts strain on the state's budget even more. Supporters say that allowing the legislature to adjust the methodology next session would allow them to better manage the costs of the reimbursement program in the long term. Opponents say that it is the state's responsibility to reimburse localities, and this state question is asking voters to go back on that promise made in 1985. It is putting the fiscal burden back on localities that did not agree to the corporate incentive to begin with. Additionally, there is the question of distribution of the ad valorem fund. Specifically, one county in Oklahoma, Mays County, gets 40% of the fund amount because a single company, Google, is eligible for that much of a property tax exemption in that county. Supporters of State Question 844 say that it's not fair to the rest of the counties. They say that amending the methodology is necessary to ensure fairness for all counties. Opposition would say that the reimbursement levels depend on the amount of property tax exemption given to a company in that county, and the counties are simply obeying the law and asking to be reimbursed for the amount of the exemption given by the state. Mays County is an industrial hub in Oklahoma where companies come and set up shop and are incentivized to do so, and it shouldn't be penalized for doing just that. Both sides can agree on one thing, that this incentives cost is increasing unsustainably in some years. However, there is disagreement on how to address the issue. Lawmakers don't want to change the company incentive, and instead they want to change the reimbursement methodology of a critical revenue source for local entities. Oklahoma policy suggests alternative solutions that would actually start to solve the problem. One, lawmakers could have written the state question to set reasonable limits on exceptionally large exemptions claimed by a single company so that the costs of the program don't skyrocket. Lawmakers could establish an overall cap on the program so that there's overall limitations. Third, in year 6, when companies finally have to begin to pay their own property taxes because that exemption has expired, they challenge the valuations that are set by the county assessors and get their amount drastically reduced because they have a lot of money and really good tax lawyers. And this causes large fluctuations in local revenue, which harms schools and bond projects. Lawmakers could change the incentive a little bit so that companies have skin in the game from the very beginning, not just when the incentive expires and companies have to begin to pay their taxes. And lastly, lawmakers could ensure that the ad valorem department in the Oklahoma Tax Commission is more involved with the assessment process of these properties if they feel the need for more transparency. So lawmakers already have options available to them to solve problems or begin to solve the problems. All that to say, lawmakers could have written a state question that actually addresses the issue, the unsustainable growth of the incentive, instead of putting local revenue and services at risk and asking for blanket authority to change whatever they want. And now, that's it for State Question 844. I'm gonna invite Tamaya Cox-Ture to come talk to you about State Question 846.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here, and anytime that I get to talk about voting, you can count me in. What a very great presentation. I feel like I knew about that, but now I was writing my notes on these notes. But thank you all for being here. My presentation actually won't nearly be as long because I think we all kind of get what is going on. So we are talking, Tamaya Cox-Ture, I'm the executive director of the ACLU of Oklahoma. The ACLU of Oklahoma is a nonpartisan organization. Oklahoma has been a part of, or ACLU of Oklahoma has been a part of the Oklahoma fabric of civil rights organizations since 1964, and really excited to be here. But I'm here to share with you about the State Question 846 that will be on your ballot. And as was previously discussed, every single voter will have an opportunity to vote on these state questions. That is unlike many folks, like in the past, where if you just thought the runoff, maybe you do not have a runoff election in your district, but you will have at least state questions. Most folks will have people to most folks will have a person to vote on, but you will definitely have state questions. So it's essential that you are sharing this information with your loved ones, family, and friends, because not everyone is aware that August 25th, you have a big election. So here we are right now. In 2010, Oklahoma was once again one of the first states to pass a voter ID law. And I'm aging myself a little bit because this is actually at the ACLU. This is my second go-around at the ACLU. I was actually at the ACLU when this came up again in this voter ID, this idea of a voter ID state question. So in 2010, voters overwhelmingly approved again, a legislative referendum. This was not necessarily brought on by the people, but by the legislature, to require voter ID or identification when you're voting. We actually, what was really interesting about how this legislative referendum came to be is that Governor Henry at the time actually vetoed a voter ID law that was going through session that was requiring some of these same identification requirements, but it was also expanding some early voting. But he ended up vetoing it, which was actually the move that many progressive organizations was asking them to do because of the potential impact of disenfranchising some Oklahoma voters. So right now, Oklahomans, if you've voted, hopefully you've voted, you are showing a proof of ID in some form or fashion. Oklahoma law allows for, whether it be your Oklahoma driver's license, an identification card, or some type of state ID, or that has your picture, as well as an expiration date, and that it conforms, that your name significantly or substantially conforms with what your name is on the voter rolls. We also allow for a tribal ID, a passport, some sort of photo ID is allowed. Oklahoma's a little bit different because we also allow for your voter registration card that when you register to vote, that all voters are given. This, unlike the other IDs, is actually one of the free of charge. It was part of a compromise that many of us that were in the policy world during that time was requesting be part of any type of voter ID, because we know that when we think about any type of state ID or identification, there's typically a cost to it. So we were essentially saying that you are taxing folks to vote when you are requiring these voter IDs. So we were pleading with them to put some form of a free form, and the voter registration card was the compromise. If you choose not to, currently in Oklahoma, if you choose not to, while you're doing your in-person voting, choose not to present your ID, if for whatever reason, like if you're like me, where your the name on your voter your name on your ID does not match your name on the voter rolls because you recently got married, or you just have been a little lazy and haven't changed those things like me, I would not be able to vote in the sense that because my names do not substantially conform. So I would have to vote by provisional ballot. So regardless of anything that happens, you must request that provisional ballot. If for whatever reason they're saying we don't find your name on the rolls, but you know that you are registered or you do not have your ID, ask for that provisional ballot. The provisional ballot, you are required to fill out an affidavit for a provisional ballot that says who you are, and then once you've casted that provisional ballot, that ballot is not ran through the voter machine. However, after Election Day, but before results are certified, county election board officials will research the information provided, and if they match, that vote will be counted. So that's currently how we are right now. And as you know, Oklahoma thankfully has mail-in voting as well. And while voters are not required to provide some sort of like identification or a copy of your ID, please remember though that it must be notarized. It must be notarized, and that you have it must be notarized, and when you get something notarized, you have to show who you are, right? You have to show some proof. So while you may not be that official proof of ID in a mail-in ballot, you are still attesting to who you are. So that is the current voting in Oklahoma. State Question 846, while it may feel it does not do much, is what kind of we're hearing from the other side, we know that that's not always the case. So the language of State Question 846, as it will show up on the ballot, is this measure adds a new Section 6 to Article 3 of the Oklahoma Constitution to require proof of identity to vote in any election authorized by law and conducted by a county election board or the state election board. This measure requires proof of identity for all authorized methods of voting. This measure requires the legislature to enact laws to specify requirements for proof of voting, for proof of identity for voting. Here is where we continue to hear both sides. For many, if approved, the legislature, once again, will be able to enact laws around voter identification. The legislature, if allowed, the legislature will be able to enact any laws against voter identification. This could require proof of voter or proof of ID when, if you choose to vote by mail. So in some states, we have seen where this is required, where you have to send in a copy of your identification. So whatever ID that you're using to vote, you would have to send in that copy. When voting by mail, it is also very possible, if approved, that this could actually prohibit or take away or allow the legislature to remove altogether mail-in voting. So it is very true when supporters of this bill, or supporters of this state question may say that this bill will have little effect the moment it's passed. That is accurate. But what it does do, it leaves too much power in the hands of the legislature. And once again, keep in mind that this is an amendment to our Constitution. So this is not just including in a statute, like in 2010 when the state question was passed. It wasn't a constitutional amendment. It was to add policy and statute. But this will now allow for voter identification to be a part of our Constitution. And why that is important is that, once again, if a future legislature wanted to improve or make any changes to our voter ID laws, they would be prohibited from making those changes because it would have to go to a vote of the people. And I think what the common thread that we are seeing in both of these state questions, besides them being poorly written, is that they give too much authority and power to the legislature. So I think the key words out of this state question really is that it requires proof of identity for all authorized methods of voting, as well as the legislature allows for the legislature to enact laws to specify what those requirements are. So we will be, if approved, the state question is approved, then we will be waiting for the state legislature to act. And I think that is where many opponents of the state question are really speaking up truly about, the biggest concerns are truly about giving, sorry, that's my time, about giving the legislature too much power. So that is state question 846. Oh my God, okay. That is giving the state question 846. But what I think is really important is that as we are having this conversation in Oklahoma about state question 846 and voter ID laws, we also know that there's a larger question around voting by mail and voter ID laws that are trying to make its way through in Congress. So we really have to make sure that we are measuring whatever steps Oklahoma takes against whatever federal laws are trying to be required. And those could, whatever's happening on the federal level, could have a severe impact of disenfranchisement here in Oklahoma. So it is probably no surprise, I am your attorney who's rarely ever in the courtroom. I'm a policy person. I've been a lobbyist for the last 20 plus years. So I say that to say is like, my job is to think about like other policy ways that we can make voting better. So yes, we have state question 846, but I really truly believe that if the Oklahoma legislature wants to think about ways to improve voting in Oklahoma, and let me back up, in a matter of making sure that I speak to the other side, because I want you all to be armed with the information. The other side, those that are supporting 846, they say voter ID is necessary to make sure that we are securing our elections. We all want safe and secure elections, full stop. But what we are grateful in Oklahoma is that we have that. Under the current law and under the current systems that we currently have, Oklahoma's election board and elections are considered some of the safest in the country. So we know that there are additional avenues at play when we are trying to change how Oklahomans can vote. But if Oklahoma safety and security is one aspect of why there are supporters, we also believe that people should be finding ways to make voting more accessible. And we believe that in how we can do that, there are actually easy ways to improve voting in Oklahoma. Automatic voter registration, that the time you're 18, that you are automatically registered to vote, so you don't have to go through that process to ensure that you're voting. That we also have no excuse absentee voting, which we're grateful that we have an opportunity for mail-in ballots, but it has to be easy and accessible for people to be able to send in those ballots, as well as extending early voting. Many of us are aware of many states that actually have 30 days of early voting, not just a couple. Whether the election day needs to be a state or federal holiday, those are other ways that we can ensure that we are turning out voting for participation. Ensuring that all colleges have some type of voting program and making it easier for college students to vote. More polling locations, that's probably, goes without saying. And ensuring that we have independent redistricting commissions. All of these we believe are easy, tried and true, researched ways to ensure that we're actually increasing voter turnout and making voting accessible. And I think I'd be remiss to say that in light of the Calais decision that came down from the Supreme Court not too long ago, we know that protecting voting rights is an essential cornerstone of all folks, right? Progressive, it should be a cornerstone of all folks, but definitely progressives organization, and specifically the ACLU. So in light of Calais, where we know that partisan gerrymandering could move forward with no problem, we want to ensure here in Oklahoma that we are taking every step to protect voting rights. And while we have not officially came out to oppose this, we believe 846 does not take the steps necessary to ensure that voting is safer, to ensure it's more accessible, and therefore we are encouraging folks to vote no on 846. So that is my time.
Okay, so before we jump to questions, I just want to say that the Oklahoma Policy Institute rarely takes positions on state questions, but after carefully reviewing both these proposals, we went to our board and asked for approval, and we highly encourage you to vote no on both these state questions. These measures deal with different topics but share the same problem, which is they ask voters to approve changes to our Constitution and give legislature the full power to change it with no guidelines on how they're going to change it. So with that, we're open for questions. If there's a question about 844, I'll take it. If there's a question about 846, I will field it to Tamaya. And we have a mic runner, Stuart Schofield in the blue jacket, who will come to you if you have a question.
I have a question about military people.
She don't need a mic.
I don't need a mic.
Okay, sorry. No. You do need a mic because we have online viewers who need to be able to hear your question.
Okay, I'm concerned about the military people who are deployed, about their vote. How will that be handled? Are they still allowed to do mail-in ballots from Desert Storm, wherever they are?
As of right now, even if approved without any action from the legislature, mail-in ballots and the way that they are counted and the way that they are assessed is still allowed. Our concern is about future legislation that could impact mail-in ballots without any parameters or guidelines in 846. The legislature is free to make those decisions without our input.
That's one of the things that I'm worried about, is that we have men deployed and women deployed. And if the legislature decides no mail-in ballots, their vote won't count, and they're serving our country. Don't y'all have a problem with that?
We do. Valid concern. And our legislature should hear that.
Oh, hi. Need to hold it? That's crazy. Okay. There are two questions. One, you mentioned, this is about 846, that there is a national conversation regarding voting by mail. Can you talk about that a little bit more? And I know that this is on the ballot here, but why is that becoming a major conversation? That's the first question. The second question is, we know that the numbers are very low here in the state of Oklahoma in terms of turnout for voting, no matter what the issue is. Does the research show that if we made these changes, that our numbers may increase, or how will they be impacted across the board?
Those are great questions. I'll take the first question. I'll actually take the second question. We do know, and I believe, and okay, policy are the number of people, but as I was preparing for this, we did see an increase in many jurisdictions that allowed for early voting to be 30 days, that allowed for early voting, that expanded early voting, that they did see a slight increase in participation. And I have those numbers as well. We do also know that in some of the instances where college campuses expanded polling places and programs, that we know that 18 to 35-year-old age groups typically have the lowest turnout. But when we are able to capture young folks at an early age to start voting, they actually continue that to vote. So capturing young people early to vote actually encourages them to continue, and they will continue to vote. We also do have, and I have some more stats for you. Maybe I do not. But we do know there's numbers out there that allows that turnout could increase if we found voting more accessible, if we're able to make voting more accessible. And I can make sure I get those numbers to you. Your first question was really about this national push, what many of you may have heard of called like the SAVE Act, which is a policy by the Republican Party and the Trump administration. The SAVE Act has many different features, but one actual feature of the SAVE Act, a few actual features of the SAVE Act is to remove actually some early voting opportunities and making voting only on election day. So what is that? The first Tuesday after the first Monday on, that's not the 1st of November. And then it is also to do away with mail-in ballots. And we actually have seen a push within the Trump administration to halt the United States Postal Service from sending out mail-in ballots. And a lawsuit was just recently temporarily halted to make sure that the USPS does send out ballots. So there is this federal effort to federalize how elections are ran. But it's really important to know that through our U.S. Constitution, elections are handled by the state. And there's many reasons why that happens. The biggest reason is actually for security purposes, that when you nationalize an election, you make it easier for bad actors to only actually have to go after one entity, where when you have states that are responsible, when states are responsible, they're able to acquire more mechanisms to ensure that those bad actors cannot hit them. So I think that is, those are just the two things those are just a few of the provisions of the SAVE Act. But there is a national effort to essentially change and nationalize our elections. That is correct. Oh.
There was one other question in the back. But you
Okay,
can go.
when I was looking at your presentation, it indicated something about the precinct that you live in. So one of the other documents that you could show would be your passport. As you well know, on your passport, your address is not on your passport. So how does that become a viable identification, certification, as it were, if you don't really.
Correct. So what is, for the photo ID is actually matching the name. So not your address, so substantially conforming to your name. So that is why actually in 2011, when we saw the first implementation of our voter ID, we had a lot of folks that were recently married and they're maid and still had their voter ID under, voter registration under their maiden name, but their ID, they may have already changed their ID, their like driver's license. And they hadn't updated. That's the word I'm looking. Had not yet updated. So they had to vote provisionally. So that is actually still an issue. So it's your name that has to conform to your, not your address.
How does the precinct conversation come into play there?
The,
Knowing where to vote. I mean, if
knowing where to vote.
it's not like if you're using a passport as identification, there's nothing. Are you still having to go to register in your precinct to be able to vote?
Yes. Well, the question was, for those online, the question was if there, how does that, does your precinct and how to register to vote, does any of that change if you're using an identification that may not have an address? How to register to vote is not changing as of right now. But 846 does not speak to how to register to vote. 846 is simply talking about what could possibly happen with voter ID and the identification used to vote. And Stuart, please jump in when I'm probably misspeaking as the other expert in the room.
I have a question about State Question 844. We know that there has been caps on property taxes for the elderly in Oklahoma, and that some of the candidates are proposing no state income tax as well. And as a person who works in education and we rely on property tax to fund our schools, has the state legislature or any entity put anything in place as far as suggestions as to how local governments will make up these income streams without these other provisions that are listed?
Simple answer is no. So yeah, as you said, property taxes are the main source of funding for schools. The state at the state level is also trying to eliminate its income tax revenue, which funds a bunch of other things. Revenue is critical for services. Have they proposed an alternative solution? Some lawmakers that I've spoken to have suggested, well, we can just shift our entire tax-based revenue to sales taxes, which in Oklahoma Policy's opinion and tax policy experts is a very bad idea because sales taxes are regressive taxes that burden low. Sorry. Where was I? So they've suggested shifting to sales tax as the sole tax that we would collect, which is a terrible idea, but most other lawmakers do not talk about the alternatives. There's no discussion of how we would replace that income for the state, and that's a little terrifying.
All right, we have a question from our online viewers.
Yes.
And it's for Anahita about the bar graph that you showed on your presentation. And it says that the graph that you showed stacked the ad valorem funds funded from taxpayers and then other sources. What are those other sources?
Yeah, so the gray bar at the bottom is the funding that comes from the 1% income tax that is collected by the state. And then the blue chart is additional appropriations. That is what speaks to the state legislature having to backfill this fund via the general revenue budget to make up its obligation to repay local entities. I think that answers the question.
About which state IDs can be shown at voting time. I'm asking for a friend that the state medical marijuana ID card has picture and name. And the understanding is that that is a valid ID to show when voting.
Stuart, do you know that off the top of your head?
I do not.
I do not know. I do know, is it issued? It's issued by the state, Does it have an expiration date?
Yes.
It could be.
He's saying it is.
It is. Oh, that was a trick. Oh, I got you.
It's for
Oh.
everybody to know. So
It's everyone to know. Oh, that's a great. You were informing us that your state medical,
Nice.
and you're letting a friend know. I love that. So for those that are in the room and those online, please know that your state medical marijuana card is a valid ID in terms of voting. All right. Thank you for that. Thank you for sharing that, actually. That's really important.
Or your concealed carry license.
Or your
as
concealed
well.
carry license.
You can look at us.
Or your concealed carry license. Did you have a question again? I did, yes. I love that. I need it.
Okay, two questions. One for 846. And I don't know if this is an appropriate question for this particular topic or not. It may be a whole nother session. When it comes to formerly incarcerated people, can you speak to that? Because I'm not sure whether they are entitled to a variety of those IDs that you have listed there. Would you mind addressing that for a moment?
Yeah. Oklahoma is actually on the more progressive side when it comes to those voting with a former incarceration. In Oklahoma, those that have been convicted and charged and have completed their sentence, completed their whole sentence, so not only completed if they were scheduled to be incarcerated for however long, but that's restitution, that's probation. Once they are completed their whole sentence, then they are automatically entitled to register for the right to register to vote. And why that's important is because depending on how long they may have been going through the justice system, they may have been removed from the voter registration rolls, and therefore they may not be registered to vote. So thankfully, Oklahoma does not require any type of judicial order like some states, but you are automatically, once you have completed your system, or completed your sentence, you are automatically allowed to re-register to vote. And then those same requirements, though, of how to prove your identity would still be required, yes. But yes, thankfully, Oklahoma, we could do a little bit better, but we are somewhere on the progressive side when it comes to our.
Let's talk about intention for a minute. In both cases, these state questions were presented by members of the legislature. Can we talk about the intention of both of the questions? What brought this to the forefront?
Well, I'm going to let policy take that, but I do want to say you touched on a very important point, and this is not. This is ACLU saying this, not OK policy. But in both cases, let's keep in mind that both state questions are giving ridiculous amount of power to our legislature. And that should terrify all of us. And that should be the common theme. And what we also need to know is that as these are of a state question that, about amending the Constitution, anytime we are amending the Constitution around voting and we're actually creating obstacles, that should be the biggest red flag for us all. What the intention is, we can all make assumptions, and it's easy for me to assume being on 23rd Street at times. However, assumptions mean nothing and intentions truly mean nothing because ultimately the power is within the people. And so the power lies within each of us to make that decision, whatever the intention is. But what we do have the common thread, and these are very different issues, the common thread is giving more power to the legislature and poorly written policy.
I think the intentions are different for each state question. For 844, I think the intention is clear that the budget is being strained. Lawmakers are struggling to balance the budget every year, especially as they cut more and more revenue. And so this is an easy way to save some money to allocate it elsewhere. With state question 846, I think that the intention is to put it into the Constitution that the state constitution now gives the legislature the authority to define voter ID. That being in the Constitution is a big deal because it makes it far much harder to challenge it legally because now lawmakers can say, The Constitution gives me the authority to define voter IDs in the court of law. That's a much stronger foot to stand on than the authority that the Constitution already gives them, which is to prevent fraud in our elections, which is a much broader authority.
On state question 844, that budget directly affects the local government, right? How they spend their money, how much money they get, and how they spend it. Has there been any effort by any city council or mayor's office or any local government to either have input in this or try to do something about it, or did the legislature even ask them, got them involved, or anything like that? So that's on 844. On 846, you said there are states that require photo IDs for voting. Has there been any studies, either in Oklahoma or other states, to show what impact that has had on voting actually? Like what has happened in those states that enacted photo ID? What happened to their voting participation after that? And then, since this is a constitutional amendment, in case it passes, has ACLU or any other organization prepared themselves for the day after? What actions are you going to take if it passes?
Okay, I already forgot the first question, so I'm going to let her take that, and then you can ask the first question again.
Great. The question is, many states do have a voter ID requirement now. I do not know the numbers, if you know, like regarding how has that impacted voting?
It basically, populations that are lower socioeconomic populations vote less, and elections are no more safe. So passing voter IDs, the data is empirical that shows it does not make elections any safer. It does not prevent this kind of election fraud that is not happening anywhere in our country, in any election really. But it does stop people in lower socioeconomic brackets from voting.
Great. And then the question is regarding lawsuits. Interesting enough, we had some great legal fellows, or legal interns this summer working with us. And while this is top of mind and anything around voting, I think our position is right now that if this passes, it probably is not a legal challenge, because we have to wait for the legislature to act to see if whatever measure they take that could impact voting, that would be what we would need to see. As of right now, we do not think that the 846 on its face is unconstitutional, but we do not trust the legislature to do, we do not trust the legislature that they wouldn't pass something that could be unconstitutional. So we are going to monitor as much as we can, because we fully expect to see something, if this passes, next session.
And then to your first question would be no.
was-
The
what was-
legislative body is not involving county officials about the county budget that will affect them. A lot of the people that pass bills like this, they want us to go to 27 counties instead of 77. They want to conglomerate counties and therefore pay less in the structure of counties, right? If you have
The
27
administrative
counties, then yeah, you're only paying 27 county commissioners and 27 county assessors and all this. So those people that it affects the most, the schools, the metro techs, the school superintendents, they are not, unless we're asking for 15 minutes in front of the speaker and shoving them in front of their faces. They do not go out of their way to ask these folks.
Mike, so that our online speakers can hear.
I'm still confused on my answer. Look, so have they been approached, the county or the city entities, have they been approached, or have they done any activities themselves to either have an input or change this state question to make the wording better, or what have they done?
The simple answer is that the legislature does not have to involve county or local officials in legislation that they pass to create a legislative referendum, and the language does not need public input. They're not required to go through that process. It's not in our state constitution or statute to go through that process. And so all they have to do is pass legislation, get through the Senate and the House, and it goes on the ballot. The only person that does review it is the Attorney General's office reviews this ballot language to ensure it meets certain requirements, like a certain reading level, that it's not illegal language or whatever, and that it's, what is it, the gist is readable or something like that, and that's about it.
All right, we have 1 minute left.
We have 1 minute left, so one question.
We'll have to get a coffee with Josh.
I'm afraid of 844 is going to affect education.
Of course.
We're 49 out of 50 states, okay? And if the legislature has its way, we'll come in number 50. We need to spend more money on our schools and our teachers to keep good educators.
Thank you. So
Okay.
the comment. Woo! The comment highlighted the concern of reduced funding for schools if State Question 844 passes. I think we are wrapping up. We are done with questions. I can talk to you after. But thank you so much for everybody that came out. Thank you for the folks watching online. If you have more questions, again, you can email us, but we also have a landing page on okpolicy.org that tells you everything you need to know about the August election, including how to register to vote, which is already past deadline, but making a plan to vote. Text messages. We're going to do a text messaging campaign. Oh, we can talk to people after. Okay, thank you.